So before we move on and get into too much things in the future, let's take a second and look back at the UFC Vegas, I think 55 card, Holly Holm versus Ketlen Vieira. Your boy over here picked the entire main card correctly. I only got one wrong, and that was our opening fight. Also, later on in the week, went on to take Parker Porter. Got that one right as well. I think I went something like 8-1, 9-1. You had a very respectable 7-3 or 6-3 last week. I'm not sure what it is, but you can look in the description. You can see our overall records on the 2022 so far. Both of us steaming out of the gates. I think I have about a 7 or 8 pick lead on you right now. Knock on wood. There's a long year to come after this little break for Memorial Day. But looking back at Holly Holm versus Ketlen Vieira, that fight caused a lot of discussion inside the UFC and MMA as a whole. A lot of people were torn. They thought Holly Holm did enough to win the fight. She did win, I think, consensus rounds 1 and round 5. And then the other judges both gave round 2 and round 4 to Ketlen Vieira. Round 3 was where 2 judges gave it to Vieira, 1 gave it to Holm. And you go back and you look at that third round, and Holly Holm did have a lot of control time, controlling Ketlen Vieira up against the fence. But what she didn't do is land the more significant strikes. She may have landed a little bit more in terms of volume, just a number of strikes, jabs and really close hooks with Ketlen Vieira up against the fence. But when you take into account that Ketlen Vieira had stunned Holly Holm at least twice in that round. She got her with a nice elbow breaking from a clinch. There was a head kick in there at one point. To open the round, there was a right hook, it was a right jab to a left hook that really sat Holly Holm down. So when you look at the more damaging shots, that was with Ketlen Vieira. Now the question, and this kind of bleeds into the opening scoring debate, which we'll get to here, but right now we're talking about Holly Holm versus Ketlen Vieira and the decision. Ultimately, I picked Ketlen Vieira on our show. Looking back and looking at that third round, the way they do the judging is not necessarily by just control time, it's by damage. And if the damage and the volume numbers are the exact same, then they'll go to control time as a tiebreaker. That's how the rules are written. So when you look at it that way, looking at the third round, because that's really the only round that's in dispute here, Ketlen Vieira landed the more damaging shots. Holly Holm had more control time up against the fence, yes, but damage before control time. And Ketlen Vieira took the damage. She should take round 3. She takes the fight 48-47. What say you?
Well, it is just interesting because it is something we've spoken about on this show before, that women's fights are heavily judged on control time. And, I think that there were a lot of people online that were looking for that and just saying flat out, like, well, Holly Holm did have the more control time the majority of the fight. And, that third round in particular was in her favor when it came to control. But the reason why people say that and why we say that is because there isn't typically a lot of damage landed in women's fights. So control time does become a heavy factor rather than just, jabs just for posterity. So, I really think you're right on that, where, Ketlen Vieira, she did do a lot and potentially enough to win that fight over, especially in that third round. But I do still believe that there's an argument to be made for Holly Holm, because it depends. Like judging, the whole thing about judging is that it's subjective. You have a human being, behind a screen, watching the fight more closely. They're up there, octagon side, and they are giving their subjective viewpoint as to who won what round. And, so there is still that little bit of a human error to it where maybe, Judge 1 really judges based on control time and Judge 2 really heavily values, just striking numbers. And there is a judging criteria for sure. But, I think everybody has their own subjective viewpoint on the judging. And we've seen this state by state as well, where maybe in Arizona, someone would win a fight and then in Las Vegas, they lose that fight. So I do think, going forward, we need a little bit more of a objective, judging system. Maybe I know AI is getting better and it's not perfect, but I don't know if an AI judge could do anything, because it is fights. It is hard to judge based on artificial intelligence. And there does need to be that human element. But one thing that's super important too going forward after this one, and I think that, we should discuss this here, is open scoring. Because open scoring is a really interesting debate. You have a lot of people bringing that up right now. And basically the idea behind that is that for anybody that doesn't watch fights religiously and doesn't know this, when it goes to a decision, sure, they get the score at the end, but you don't know, if you're a fighter in the octagon, you don't know what your score is going in. So a lot of times you'll see fighters go into, the third or the fifth round, and their coaches are telling them, yo, you're up in this fight. And then the scorecards come out in the end, and their coach was actually incorrect in the corner. And, that fighter didn't do enough to win in the third round because maybe they just, thought they had it in the bag or whatever. Or, they didn't aggressively chase a finish enough. So open scoring really, makes it clear for fighters, coaches, fans, everybody, the score of each round, whether it be 10-9 or 10-7 going into, the second round. You know exactly just how much you have to do. Or, that is one of the debates against it right now, too, though, is that fighters won't do enough. They know they're up in the fight. But, I think it's something really interesting to look at because Invicta started it. And, Tom, just answer this question for me real quick if you know. Is Invicta only women? Okay. So Invicta started, I thought so, because they only produce, some incredible female prospects. But Invicta started doing open scoring. And oddly enough, that debate that open scoring would stop fighters, say they're up 2-0 going into the third, they wouldn't do enough to win in the third round. Invicta actually released data last week that fighters that were up going into the third round aggressively chased finishes more and had a 17%, I believe it was 17% higher finishing rate as opposed to before they had open scoring. And I don't know if that's just incidental, but, I just think it's something really interesting, and fans are with it, fighters are with it. It makes it clear, whether you have to go out there and put it all on the table in round 3 or, if you can coast a little bit, which I don't agree with anybody doing, and that is the argument against it, like I said. But it also makes it. Yeah, go for it.
You make the point right there. Is if I know that I'm up 2-0 going into the third round on you, what's the point? Fighters are all fighting for a finish anyway. So knowing the score, you should still be trying to finish. And if you're going to make the argument that you have open scoring, you need to also, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but there shouldn't be necessarily a win bonus. I think the win show bonus, maybe instead of making, if you're 10-10 right now, maybe you make 18, right? And then there's a finish bonus. If you finish the fight, then you get a bonus. And then maybe you can escalate that amount of bonus depending on the round or something like that to incentivize these guys to go out there and fight. But at the end of the day, even now, people are going and chasing a bonus or chasing a finish. They want to win the fight by finish. You talk to any fighter, they're not one of them. They're like, yeah, I want to win this one by. A couple of them, I know post-fighters said, oh, I wanted this to go 5 rounds to prove that I could go 5 rounds. But at the end of the day, if there was an opportunity where those fighters could have finished the fight, they're going to finish the fight and they're going to get out of there. They're not going to put their bodies and the rest of their careers on the line for a time where they don't necessarily have to do it if they could have gotten out there. That's silly, and that's against self-preservation. Maybe there's a couple crazy people, but by and large, you're talking about fighters. If they're going in there, they want to finish the fight. So I don't see how open scoring really solves the. And the only people talking about open scoring is because of a bad decision. Open scoring doesn't affect what happens with a bad decision. If Holly Holm knew that she was up on 1 scorecard, down on 2 scorecards, do you think that's going to do anything about how she approached the 5th round? She didn't know where she was, so she approached that 5th round as if she needed a finish in order to win. She won that 5th round. She still didn't win the fight. Knowing what the score was going into the 5th shouldn't have changed what her approach is going into the 5th anyway. If you're up 2, search for a finish. Go get that finish bonus so you can get out of there and save yourself time of being in danger. If you're not in the lead or you don't know, well, go out there and face the finish anyway so it doesn't go to the judges. At the end of the day, everybody should be going out there and trying to finish their opponent so they can get out of there sooner and get out of the harm's way quicker. So I don't see how knowing what the score is going to change that, and it's definitely not going to help the judging decision, because at the end of the day, you're just knowing what the bad score is under anything. And if you're still chasing a finish, it doesn't change anything. Now, if you want to do open scoring and fighters want it, then fine. But you got to also understand what that takes away is that moment of tense during a really close fight where you're waiting and no, like that goes away. That's there's no moment of tension there anymore. Like after a big KO, like yeah, it's cool to hear Bruce Buffer say it, but it's just a formality. When the title fight or even a 3-round banger like Gaethje and Chandler, when that goes to decision, fucking if you know what the score is, who the fuck like I mean, it takes a little bit of that away from me. So with the added potential risk of fighters then cruising in that 3rd round. And for the problem that the reason we're talking about open scoring is to solve the problem of bad judging. Like those are 2 different problems. So it's not even solving what caused us to talk about in the first place. It doesn't hit any of the metrics for me. If people want it, we can have it. I think there's more cons than good though.
Yeah, I didn't think about that aspect from a fan point too, where it's like, there is that moment of tense suspense, waiting for Bruce Buffer to announce the decision. That is a huge moment for us as fans. And
people in the cage, for everybody. I mean, that's a huge moment for the sport.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a long time before open scoring does come around, because being that this is a state by state, commission type sport, it's going to take a long time for each state to want to agree. Each state's athletic commission to want to agree to open scoring. But I saw some people making arguments for how to fix bad judging, and maybe you add a commentary card to the end of each round as a judge, like just a few simple bullet points as to why you scored a round for somebody as opposed to the other way around. And obviously if it's a 10-8 round and that's across the board, and it's something significant, well, that's easy. We all know why it was a 10-8 round. But if it's a close round and we may need judges to justify why they're judging one way or the other in a round. So I think that may be a solution going forward. The only problem is that you only have a minute in between rounds. It's a fast-moving sport, 5-minute rounds. So there's got to be some correction going forward. What the solution is, I'm not entirely sure. But I think, open scoring, if it's for like a smaller fight on a fight night, that would be good. Then you have to be a little bit, iffy with it, though, because you're right. When it comes down to those big title fights and they go 5 rounds to the decision, that is a big tense moment. A lot of suspense there. So, yeah, you're 100% right about that. Only time will tell, though. We'll see if people hop onto it. It doesn't seem like Dana White is eager to go with open scoring anytime soon, but it's succeeding for Invicta so far. So, who knows? Maybe that's in the cards for the future. What do we have next on this slate of topics today, Tom?